welcome back. The conference will continue now with one of our guest speakers. Please join me in welcoming Adil Oran to the stage, Director of Migrant Entrepreneurship Research Center, for his presentation on innovative entrepreneurship.
See, actually, I don't believe in clapping at the beginning, because you don't know what you're going to get, okay? What if you clap and it's a really bad presentation? You don't get to take it back. So this one, thank you anyways, but the one at the end is more valuable. We'll see. Okay, so welcome. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Adil. I am an instructor at the Department of Business Administration here at the university. I am also the director of the Entrepreneurship Research Center since 2012. My research and teaching is, my PhD is in finance, but since 2012 I've been spending most of my time, 75–80%, working on the entrepreneurship side. I feel it is my duty to try to contribute to the entrepreneurship ecosystem at the university, in Ankara, and in Turkey. So you'll see me in a lot of places trying to, do certain things. I go around the university a lot to different departments, helping them, first of all, try to understand what entrepreneurship is, and then help them develop ideas. Once they have ideas, how can they become businesses? Once they become businesses, how can they become more successful? So we work at many different levels. So today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about innovative entrepreneurship, or why we should be interested in entrepreneurship. And then second, what is the role of migrants within this entrepreneurship? If you want to learn anything about me, just into Google, type in Adil Oran, I come up, okay? My name isn't that common, and even though there are a few other Adil Orans, I've captured most of the territory, at least technologically. So, why is entrepreneurship interesting? Well, it plays an important role in the economy, especially as time goes by. The vast majority of businesses, 99% plus, are small and medium-sized enterprises. So entrepreneurship and small business management sometimes is used interchangeably, even though they're not exactly the same. But regardless, they have an important role in the economy. In number, in size, so 99.8% actually in Turkey are SMEs. When you think about in terms of revenues generated, 75% comes from SMEs, 25% from the large companies. But it's, and then you can, even in exports, of Turkish exports, 55% come from SMEs. So those large companies we usually think of when we say the economy play a minority role, even in Turkish exports. So they're important, but they're especially important if you want to grow, if you want to become bigger, if you want to increase your size, and especially if you want to create new jobs. Research has shown, maybe it wasn't like this 50 years ago, but in today's world, job creation, the largest role is on new startups, small ones. Not all of them create all of these jobs, but there's a handful, something like 3 to 5% of startups, which are created, and then they become successful, and they create the majority of new jobs in not just our economy, but around the world. There's a Kaufman study for the US looking 1980 to 2005, where they found that of net new jobs, almost all of them were created by SMEs. I ran into one for Austria, where it said about 2/3 of net new jobs were coming from these SMEs. And in almost all countries, at least 50%, usually more, has been coming from these new companies, from entrepreneurs trying, and some of them becoming successful, not all of them. And also there's at least two groups. There are the small companies, which are going to stay small. Okay? And then there's this other group, high growth potential entrepreneurs, usually technology-based, usually with university and others, and they're the ones that make the biggest difference. They start small, but they have a good idea, and if they're successful, they create the vast majority of the jobs. And innovation, especially for some types of innovation, like disruptive innovation and so on, small businesses do a better job, is what research has found. So for innovation-based entrepreneurship that almost every single country in the world needs, entrepreneurs play an important role. Now, this is for Turkey, but it's actually valid for quite a few countries. For example, for Turkey, what is Turkey's most valuable resource? Should I pick on the Turkish people or foreigners? What do you think Turkey's most valuable resource is? Human resources? No, nothing about borium, nothing about hazelnuts, nothing about pistachios or something like that? So straight for human resources? Well, yes, it is quite important. So we have a young population, which many countries salivate with. They'd like to have such a population. Here's our population pyramid in percentages. So a healthy one looks either like this or like a pyramid. It needs to have a fat bottom. Because that is the, well, initially these ones don't create before 50, 90, maybe not, but this group is the one that creates value and pays taxes and allows the economy to take care of itself. And these ones are in the labor force, and then they get out of the labor force, they need to be supported. So a healthy structure needs to have a fat bottom, which allows this to continue operating. This is what Europe looks like, Western Europe. It doesn't have the fat bottom. Its belly has moved up. And this is going to continue to become a bigger and bigger problem. This is why Europe needs an infusion of young employees, workers, and other things. So this is one reason. This is even worse. This is Japan. They have two humps, and they're moving in further, and they live longer as well. So, well, they've kind of come against this, and they have more robotics, more automation. So they're trying to do some things with it, but again, it's not a healthy structure. Okay? So yes, a very important, valuable resource. But if I was to ask you, what is Turkey's largest problem currently? Education? Capital? Problems? Inflows? Outflows? No creation of value? Really? Well, remember this. This is also our biggest problem, because what these people are doing is they're not very well educated and they don't have jobs, many of them. So that very valuable resource is not being utilized. And this is not just a Turkish problem. Many, well, maybe not as bad as ours, but many countries, and there's even a book that has been written about this, called The Coming Jobs War. It's not about Steve Jobs. It's about the fact that many countries are going to have to deal with a lot of problems. Why? Because their people are not going to have enough jobs, and the ones that don't have jobs are going to get more and more upset, and there's going to be problems, social unrest, and so on. And in that book, they argue it might even cause wars between countries, between the ones that have lost the jobs, those that have gained it, and the interaction of them. I hope it doesn't get to a war, but it is a very important problem nonetheless. Here is the NEET numbers, not in education, employment, or training. So 15 to 29-year-olds, this was for 2015, but it hasn't changed an awful lot, unfortunately. We're at the top. We don't want to be at the top, okay? This says that we have about 30% of our 15 to 29-year-old valuable resource which is not being utilized. And a number of other countries also, Italy, Greece, Spain, Mexico. Sorry. So it is a big problem, and And the reason that entrepreneurship is so popular today is that it is it's not an exact solution, but it's one of the only ones that might be a solution to at least some of this problem. So, but I'm not interested in all types of entrepreneurship. I am at one of the top universities in Turkey, and I am more focused on high growth potential, high impact entrepreneurship. Because, somebody that opens up another cafe, a lifestyle business, good for them, but they're not the ones that are going to make the big differences. If big differences are going to be made, it's going to come from the high growth potential entrepreneurs. How do I define it? I cheat. I use Eric Ries's definition, or kind of definition, where he defines the entrepreneur, his entrepreneur, is somebody who tries to develop a new product or service, okay, but does this under conditions of high uncertainty, okay? So if you're opening up the 5th restaurant on the same street, not a lot of unknown there. But if you're truly doing something new, something untried, at least in that city, in that country, that potentially, if successful, doesn't promise success, but if successful, can make a big difference. Okay? And two reasons I like this a lot. One, it does not include all typical entrepreneurs. So that 5th restaurant on the same street, not included, because it's not under high uncertainty. And it includes some people which typically would not count as entrepreneurs. Does this say anything about having to have a profit motive? No. Does it say anything about having to open their own company? No. So this definition is wide enough to encompass some new concepts that we've run into, like social entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship, entrepreneurship within large bureaucracies or corporations, okay, which are also important. So I like it for that reason, and he's the author of The Lean Startup, which is one of the books I use as in my courses, and I recommend it. What do you think when you see these companies? Huge. They're, at the time I prepared the presentation, they were the 20 most valuable companies in the world. So, huge. Words. Give me words. Multinational.
Unicorn.
Unicorn. Well, unicorn, once you're on a stock exchange, you drop off the unicorn list. So a lot of these are publicly traded, so they've lost that status. What else?
IT related.
IT related, especially recently, right? But they're big, right? What do I see? I see they're going to be in trouble. They're probably, 10 years from now, they're probably not all going to be here. A significant portion of them will probably not be on this list. They will be replaced. And corporations have noticed this. For that reason, the entrepreneurship skills and tools that we talk about, large corporations, large successful corporations have also started to become interested in them. Because to be able to keep up with other big successful companies, they're having to run. So like the U2 song, Running to Stand Still. If you don't know it, go listen to it. It's a good song. Okay? So just to keep up, they need to innovate. They need to change. They need to improve. So intrapreneurship has become a big deal. So this is, for example, how that list, the top 10, changed over 100 years at 50-year intervals. And it's changed a lot. Okay? I don't have very much time, so you can find my presentation on my website and other places as well. But, coming to Anatolia, Heraclitus is from Anatolia. He's from Ephesus. If you haven't been, go there. It's nice. And I guess he had some things to say about change. Okay? Okay? So his famous saying, you can never step into the same river twice. Okay? He also was the one that said, the only constant is change itself. So he had this thing about change. But he was right. Change is constant, is ever happening again and again and again. And we need to see this. This is the amount of time a typical company entering the S&P 500 has remained on the S&P 500. So notice that around 1955, if you were able to get onto the S&P 500, you'd stay there for at least 50, 60 years. Today, this is probably getting close to 10 years. So, becoming big and successful does not ensure you will stay big and successful. So, that's why they need entrepreneurship. So, let's come to our main topic, migrant entrepreneurs. What role do migrants have? What do they play in this environment? And this morning you gave us some figures. Thank you for those. But the main reason is a lot of research tells us that immigrants, at least in the US and in the UK, probably, and the General Entrepreneurship Monitor has shown that, if not twice, significantly more, migrants behave more entrepreneurial. So, for example, for the US, of the US population, about 13% were born in another country, so 13% migrants. The percentage of businesses owned, begun by these, the percentage of entrepreneurs is more than twice that. Almost 29% by migrants. So, for the UK, you mentioned these numbers. For the UK, this is actually not migrants, this is white UK male, usually, versus others. Here, notice that even though it has changed over time a little bit, non-white UK residents have been more entrepreneurial. Almost 7% plus to almost 14%. When we look at directly migrants versus locals, lifelong residents, again, at sometimes it has kind of gotten close, but especially after crisis and other things, the difference has really opened up, and 7% lifelong residents in entrepreneurship, or of 100 UK residents which have always lived there, about 7% go into entrepreneurship, whereas for the non-migrants, this ratio is about twice, about 13% or so. So, significantly higher probability of becoming an entrepreneur for people that are not local, that are not domestic. And there's also numbers for, it says that in 69 countries where the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor collects this data, in almost all of them, immigrants have higher total entrepreneurship activity. So it's not just US, UK, which is benefiting from the presence of immigrants, which are behaving entrepreneurially. So, what's going on as a result of this? Another statistic tells us that the type of entrepreneurship that they're involved in is also interesting. Remember the white versus non-white? Well, the numbers also say that women entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, minority entrepreneurs, and migrants are also more likely to be involved in entrepreneurship that has a more social bent. So the typical white male entrepreneur wants money, okay, does entrepreneurship for profit, whereas these other groups, they also want a little bit of money, but they also think about impact or social good in their entrepreneurship. So creating meaning, doing something beneficial also has an important role for them. So, what do you think? Do all of these entrepreneurs, migrants and others, do you think that most of the migrant entrepreneurs, do they tend to focus on the kind of lifestyle businesses, the ones that wash cars, that dig holes, ditches, agriculture, construction, and so on? Where do these migrant entrepreneurs tend to go towards? So do you think they're mostly small business, which isn't going to grow? Or do they have impacts on the big side of things as well? Well, both actually. Because remember, most businesses are small. So in number, probably most are in small businesses, but they are not underrepresented on the large side of things either. There's a lot of migrants in large, successful enterprises. Okay? So, again, some numbers. So, if you look at, this is the Fortune 500. Anybody know what the difference between the S&P 500 versus Fortune 500? And why are they different? Or are they different? S&P 500 usually tends to be more based on value, whereas Fortune 500 is usually based on sales revenue, on how much sales they're having. And they're not always the same, okay? Even though there's a lot of overlap. So, in the Fortune 500, the 500 companies with the most sales, what percentage do you think of companies have at least one founder that was an immigrant? And here they separate out, they say direct first generation immigrant and second generation. So the son of somebody that was born in another country. And in 500 companies, first generation founders, or companies founded by first generation, there's about 90 of them. 90 or 94. I have to look at my notes exactly. Second generation, more than 110. So more than 200 of the top 500 have immigrant founders, first or second generation together. So yes, they are present significantly in large successful businesses as well. So this, how can you read this? The dark blue are the ones first generation, immigrant founded, whereas the second group are children of immigrants. So of the top 10, it says that, 30% are either first or second generation. If you look here, this is the top 250, and this line is the top 500. So more than 40% of Fortune 500 companies were established by first or second generation immigrants. So they do play a big, important role in large businesses as well. It's not just the little small family businesses that they operate. And I think I have one more slide with that. So what sectors are they in? So not just any sector. They're in high tech a lot, but they're also in wholesale, in retail, in finance, in energy, all over the place. So it's not necessarily just concentrated to one area that we see them. So good for you, migrants. Now, the final question. How much time do we have? How many minutes? Should I finish? Yeah. I'll use up a few more. Why? Tell me why migrants are more likely to behave as an entrepreneur. Research tends to show us a few reasons. I'm on count. One is there is probably a selection bias. And a few. For example, when the United States or the UK or a European country allows you into that country, especially as an entrepreneur or to come and go to university there is a selection bias. They don't do it randomly. Okay? So much more likely that they are choosing from the cream, sometimes the crème de la crème, which they are allowing to come in, right? So there is a bias. But there's also a self-selection bias. Most of the people that choose to be, I'm not talking about the ones that are forced into becoming a migrant, but those that choose to be a migrant, they are maybe also better suited to the qualifications that make good entrepreneurs. Like, they're willing to change countries, change languages, change currencies, change legal systems. So being willing to put up with these, they're probably not very risk averse. They're willing to take on the risk. They're willing to try new things. Okay? Probably one of the things which affects this. And potentially a number of others. What else? Discrimination. Migrants are usually discriminated against. They find it more difficult to find jobs in the traditional businesses. There's been research, for example, which looks at they hand in a CV, the same CV, local name, foreign name. The local name gets invited to many, many more interviews than the one with the foreign sounding names, for example, one of the findings. And they're kind of said, oh, this is maybe not for you, these types of businesses. So they sometimes don't have the traditional path that they can follow. So sometimes they're also, because of this discrimination, they may be kind of pushed towards becoming their own bosses or other similar businesses. So this is also frequently stated as a potential reason that they go into entrepreneurship. They are usually, not always, some migrants are very rich, live in nice places, but many migrants have problems. They live in places, in groups that are not very well served. So they have problems. They see the problems, and they don't have to accept the problems directly. So having a chance to see those problems and solve those problems may also contribute to their becoming entrepreneurs. For example, somebody that goes to a developed country wants to send money back home and finds that, they have to pay 15-20% of the money as to the banks, to the financial institutions to be able to send the money back. Oh, this is something that needs to be solved, right? Fintech. So do it with blockchain, whatever, that's up to you. So good problems, or health problems, or other problems may be encountered. Another common one is that they have cross-cultural experiences. They have seen different cultures. They have seen different economies, different solutions, and so on. In Turkish, we have a saying, I'll translate, is that the one that knows the most is not the one that has lived the longest, rather it is the one that has traveled the most. You tend to learn more as you travel, as you see new places, new things. Okay? Age may also help. Ceteris paribus, holding other things constant. It'll benefit. But seeing different things does make a big difference. So cross-cultural experiences may also make a big difference into being able to see this. So different cultures, different products, services. You go to another country, you see something that they don't have back home. Can I take it back? Or you go there and you see that they don't have restaurants with your food. Bring that. So it can be both ways. and so on. So making transfers and creating links between the differences that they see can be quite valuable. And then, one other thing that I'll talk about is it can also stimulate creativity. Okay? People that see different things, different cultures, and so on, can also come up with new combinations, new solutions. So, creativity-wise, this can also be an advantage to the migrants. So they are able to find new ideas, solutions, and problems from the different places and bring them together. Here's a little research, even for short periods of time. Not becoming a migrant for life, but becoming a migrant for a semester. Going on an exchange program, Erasmus program, for example. Here's some research by Bandor and Franke. They looked at about 150 students that went on an exchange program, and they had a control group who just stayed in the same place. Then they had both groups come up with entrepreneurial ideas. And then, here's the nice part, they had these evaluated by four VCs. So a group of 4 graded these about how good or bad the ideas were. And they found that the ones that had just gone for an Erasmus for 1 semester, coming back, they had 17% higher grade on their ideas. So even for 1 semester, going somewhere new, seeing different things, helped them come up with better, slightly better entrepreneurship ideas. Notice that it's still 2 out of 4. Okay? So not all ideas, at least initially, are good, but still, statistically, significantly better ideas is what they found. And they also found that, for example, when you go to these people and they divide them into 2, and for one group, they said, oh, tell me about what you saw, what you experienced. So they primed the people. They made them think about what they did in their exchange. To the other group, they said, okay, what did you do last week? What did you do around here? So they both had them explain something, and then they had them try to come up with some creative ideas. And the group that was primed, that had to think about what they did in this new culture, different culture, also had higher creativity, higher scores. So, biggest one is probably, one, they have to, so they do more entrepreneurship, and second, they also have some characteristics which help them become entrepreneurs, do a better job. But to sum it up, migrants don't only take from the countries that they go to. They also make significant contributions. And this is contributions of serving tables, being a waitress, and so on, all the way up to establishing technological companies. For example, in the US, about 1/4 of new technology and/or engineering-based companies had at least one migrant founder. New numbers. So the reason the US has been able to develop so much and kind of stupid about what Trump is trying to do right now is they greatly benefit from allowing in especially the high qualified entrepreneurs. And that's why, even though the US now is kind of trying to cut back on this, there are some other countries which are taking big advantage of this. New Zealand, Canada, Estonia, and a number of other countries are acting smartly and trying to gather those entrepreneurial, especially high-quality minds as well. And if we're smart, we'd also try to do the same. We have some projects.